At St Peter's Church in Wenhaston, East Anglia, is a 15th century Doom, a screen that depicts characters and activities from the Day of Judgement or Doomsday. Its subject derived from the Bible, the Wenhaston Doom is painted on 9 horizontal Baltic oak planks, cut to the shape of the original medieval chancel arch. Paintings are probably undertaken by East Anglian journeyman artists. Within 100 years of its creation, sculptures of the Virgin, the Crucifix and St John the Evangelist were all cut down, leaving their shape on the Doom, and the Doom was whitewashed over in response to the royal injunctions of Edward VI and the Reformation around 1547, which abolished paintings in churches. The Doom remained protected by its whitewash for the next 400 years. In 1892, the East End chancel was reconstructed and the whitewashed Doom removed and thrown out into the churchyard to await final destruction. During the night it rained, and in the morning the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist were recognisable through a thin trickle of dissolving whitewash. The Doom was cleaned, but it didn't fit the new chancel and has ended up on the north wall of the church. So what does it all mean? The Doom provided a visual interpretation of the end of the world, as described in Matthew's Gospel, and was easier to understand by illiterate people in its uncluttered, simple format. The Wenhaston Doom derives its features from passages in St Matthew's Gospel, the Book of Ezekiel, and the first epistle of St Paul to the Corinthians. Let's have a look at each of the elements, their meanings, and what the congregation may have heard at the time. At the top left of centre is the figure of God, appearing as Christ, the Son of Man. It is just possible to see the sun to the left of him and the moon to the right.
Matthew chapter 24. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light.
Christ is depicted enthroned on a rainbow. The wounds on his hands and side represent one of the most popular masses in late medieval England, that dedicated to the 5 wounds of Christ.
Ezekiel chapter 1. And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, and upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above it, as the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord.
At the top right, the Virgin Mary and St John the Baptist, the 2 most powerful intercessors in the medieval church, kneel and pray together. In the original arrangement there would have been 3-dimensional carved figures standing on the rood beam, destroyed during the Reformation. These figures, which are now only indicated by the 3 unpainted areas, could have looked like this, showing from left to right the Virgin Mary, Christ on the cross, and St John the Evangelist. Matthew chapter 25 explains the positioning of the other elements of the Doom.
And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire and punishment, prepared for the devil and his angels. But the righteous will go into eternal life.
At the bottom left-hand side of the rainbow, an angel's hand and trumpet are just visible. The angel has mostly been destroyed as it was cut out to accommodate pipes inserted through the Doom at a later date. Here's how it may have looked.
Matthew chapter 24. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet.
The resurrection itself is quick, in icto oculi, in the twinkling of an eye.
1 Corinthians chapter 15. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible.
The day of resurrection is shown in the middle right-hand side, the dead rising from the earth in their shrouds, as naked as when they were created, all aged about 33, the age at which Christ died. As the resurrected appear above the ground, their headgear, such as crowns, tiaras, mitres, and even tonsured scalps, are used to demonstrate a man or woman's station in life. The wearers of these classy headdresses are usually shown mixing with ordinary mortals, everyone being equal on Judgement Day. But here on the Wenhaston Doom we see a king, a bishop, a cardinal and a queen, superior and set apart. Facing them stands St. Peter in his papal robes and tiara, holding a golden key for unlocking the gates of heaven, and representing the Church which alone had power through the sacraments to admit men and women to eternal life. Perhaps one of the most interesting characters appearing in the Last Judgment is the Archangel Michael. The early Church had adapted pagan customs to Christian purposes, thus avoiding too much dissimilarity in practice during the period of conversion. The attributes of the pagan god Mercury were assumed by Michael, the messenger of heaven, and like Mercury before him, he became the guide of the dead. The Requiem Mass contained the words,
"And let the standard-bearer Michael bring them into the holy light."
As Mercury had performed the weighing of the souls in classical mythology, so Michael now appears centre stage and holds the scales in his left hand. This is described by St. Augustine as,
"Good and evil actions shall be as if hanging in the scales."
His contemporary, St. John Chrysostom, wrote,
"Our actions and words will be placed in the scales."
On his head, Michael wears a circlet surmounted by a cross, fashionable in Northern European art, while his right hand grasps the hilt of his sword. However, the weighing of the souls applies artistic license, for there was always a certain humour in imps in the right hand tipping the scales, while those being weighed in the left hand praying whether they were on their way up or down, and St. Michael, severe but just. The devil is not always present, but when he is, these words are attributed to him by St. Augustine.
"O most just judge, this sinner is mine because of his sin, since he did not choose to be yours by grace. He is yours by his nature, mine by his misery, yours due to your passion, mine by my persuasion. You he disobeyed, me he obeyed. Judge that he is mine, and must be damned with me."
And why the second face painted on the devil's belly? This is an artistic convention often seen in late medieval painting, suggesting that the devil's souls have been put at the service of his lower appetite, the fallen angel having reached the level of the brute. The Latin scroll carried in his left hand reads, "Nunc quod dies tu facias tabo amnesto."
Now for what is lacking may you give pardon for sin.
The Last Judgment has now ended, and the sheep and the goats are separated. The sheep to the right of Christ, towards the heavenly mansions, the goats to the left, to the mouth of hell. On the far lower right of the doom, the devils get to grips with the damned, seize them and hustle them off with red-hot chains to hell. Gregory the Great was one of the first commentators who saw Satan in the figure of Leviathan, a huge aquatic animal, often mentioned in Hebrew poetry. Words of Job were used as a blueprint for the mouth of hell.
"Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook? His teeth are terrible round about. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth."
Meanwhile, on the other side of the doom, the righteous quietly and peacefully enter the heavenly mansions, prepared for life eternal. The artistic interpretation of the time gave way to the wildest imaginings, a gift to artists who took delight in converting their darkest thoughts into art. Finally, at the bottom of the doom are words from chapter 13 of St. Paul's epistle to the Romans.
"Let every soul submit unto the authority of the higher powers, for there is no power but God. The powers that be are ordained by God, but they that resist or are against the ordinance of God shall receive themselves utter damnation. For rulers are not fearful to them that do good, but to them that do evil, for he is the minister of God."
The Wenhaston Doom is not a great painting, but it is a great survivor, and would have been typical of the energetic and panoramic decoration which was so vital for the transmission of Christian teaching from the parish priest to his people. It is now considered to be the finest doom of its period in England.